With their deep dark eyes and gray-skinned bodies, they are pop culture's most familiar aliens, and they are known as the Greys. But what do we know about these presumed extraterrestrials? Eyewitnesses swear they have encountered these aliens, and they believe the Greys are here on a diabolical mission, abducting humans and conducting reproductive experiments.
This is a very real phenomenon. Something is happening to these people.
Who are they? Where are they from? And what do they want? Are they real?
It's good to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out.
Next on UFO Files, the mystery of the Greys' agenda. The Greys. They are depicted in books, magazines, and in the movies. They are commonly described as being about 4 feet tall, with huge bald heads that sit on gray, frail, hairless bodies. These creatures have small noses, or no noses at all, slits for mouths, no ears or visible reproductive organs, and very distinctive eyes.
They come to a point, not actually a point, but they just come up like almonds, big almonds.
Almost a black, dark brown. They're dark.
Those who maintain that extraterrestrials do exist often portray Greys as the bad guys of the alien world.
The Greys, from what I know, are just like the worker bees. When they come and get you, they come and get you.
They took time out of my life and replaced it either with a blank spot or with a scary memory.
If there are Greys or any other alien species, and they're here, what do they really want? What is their agenda?
An effort to create an offspring race that perhaps had the best qualities of humanity and the best qualities of these alien beings.
Many ufologists, people who routinely research alien sightings, claim that Greys have been visiting Earth for thousands of years. Records, they say, exist as petroglyphs, cave drawings, and prehistoric artwork.
All around the world, we have these stories of beings coming from the heavens to Earth, star beings, whether it be the Hopi Indians in North America, all these South American cultures, the Mayans, the Aztecs, all around the world, there are these stories of gods visiting ancient man.
6,000-year-old artifacts have been found in what was Samaria, modern-day Iraq. Interpreters of the carvings have said they depict servants or helpers of their gods.
Many of the artifacts that they've left us resemble what we would call today a modern-day gray alien. Large bulbous head, large eyes, spindly limbs, very thin bodies.
Historically, UFOs or aliens go largely unmentioned again until the dawn of the modern era. It is in the 20th century that the Greys' agenda begins to take shape. According to the UFO community, since then and to this day, there has been an obvious and persistent increase in encounters with the Greys. One of the most surprising claims made by some in the UFO community is that during World War II, Hitler and the Nazis were actually in collusion with the Greys. They say the aliens gave the Nazis advanced weapons technology used during the war. Since the Second World War, literally hundreds of people have claimed experiences with the Grey aliens.
The number reported, the quality of the reports, the similarities of the reports, and the fact that many of these reports can be substantiated under hypnosis lends very compelling strength to the idea that this is a very real phenomenon. Something is happening to these people.
No official record for alien encounters or abductions exists. However, the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, keeps an unofficial tally of UFO sightings. Their statistics show that the number of sightings have gone from a handful every year in the early part of the 20th century to dozens by the middle of the 20th century, and then thousands every year beginning in the 21st century.
Well, it seems that the whole business about alien abduction really dates from the Cold War. Back when there were UFOs, unidentified flying objects being spotted, and it was all these international tensions after the Second World War.
According to UFO believers, the Greys first made contact through the much-debated 1947 crash in the desert outside Roswell, New Mexico.
The Roswell story is that a rancher named Mac Brazel came into Roswell and told a story to the newspaper about how he had found some strange debris. And from that incident, the Roswell incident, we've now got an elaborate story that many of the American public think is a story of flying saucer wreckage and perhaps little alien greys whose corpses were scattered about, some of whom may have survived alive and are hidden away at some secret facility.
The official U.S. government position? A large spy balloon went down at Roswell, not an alien spaceship. It was part of a secret project designed to detect emissions from Soviet nuclear tests. Ufologists believe otherwise.
The Roswell story has been debated by a lot of people, but one thing that we know is that something came down about 75 miles north of Roswell Army Airfield in the summer of 1947. This was investigated by the 509th Bomber Unit's Chief Intelligence Officer, who was Captain Jesse Marcel. We know that some of this debris was taken back to the Army Air Base. We know that Marcel and the Army Air Base commander, Colonel Blanchard, thought that this was material from a flying disc. And we know that they thought this because a press release went out immediately announcing that the U.S. Army recovered one of the infamous flying discs that was in the news at that time.
In the years since the Roswell incident, advocates argue that all contact between the Greys and the government have been kept top secret. Despite repeated official government denials that a UFO crashed in the New Mexico desert, the stories won't die.
There are now more than 400 individuals on the public record who said, I was there, I picked up pieces, I saw pieces of wreckage, I saw the craft, I saw the bodies. So Roswell is simply a question of belief. Who do you choose to believe?
Fact or fiction? UFO sightings increased dramatically after the Roswell incident. In the 1950s, movie makers soon seized on these stories, and for the first time, alien creatures appeared invading Earth with an agenda, sometimes evil. Films like The Thing and Plan 9 from Outer Space tapped into the public's fascination and fears of UFOs. The Day the Earth Stood Still warned of terrible consequences if Earth did not press forward into space as a friendly partner. Stories of abduction by an alien race called the Greys soon followed.
It was only really until the 1960s did people begin to believe that they were actually being abducted themselves by beings from other planets.
In 1961, a New Hampshire couple became the first people in history to officially report being abducted by the Greys.
The Betty and Barney Hill story, of course, is one of the abduction experiences that kind of kicked off the whole abduction phenomenon.
The case of Betty and Barney Hill remains the seminal alien abduction tale. It stands as the first ever recorded encounter with the Greys, the most popularly noted alien species said to visit the Earth. It allegedly occurred near Portsmouth, New Hampshire on September 19, 1961. To this day, skeptics cannot dispute every detail of the story. Believers see the Hills incident as the defining moment in Grey history, when the nation and the world awoke to the troubling phenomenon of alien abduction. In her last on-camera interview, the late Betty Hill shared her experience.
My husband Barney and I are returning from Montreal, Canada. We're traveling down through the White Mountains of New Hampshire when we suddenly spot what we thought was a new star in the sky. And as we watched this, it changed direction and came in towards us.
Barney pulled over, grabbed a pair of binoculars, and stepped out of the car to get a closer look at the menacing flying object. Betty Hill's niece, Kathy Martin, was a teenager when this incident occurred.
At that time, through the binoculars, he saw the leader, what he called the leader, and crew members. There were people looking down at him.
And as he's watching, it began to descend. And at this point, he became frightened and ran back to the car, yelling that they were trying to capture us.
She was screaming to him, "Barney, you damn fool, come back here. Get back here."
They sped off. A short while later, they heard a buzzing sound. They turned onto a logging road and stopped.
There was a roadblock and there were people in the road. The people approached the car and they realized at that point that they were not human, that they were the people that Barney had seen in the UFO. This is where their memory lapsed. The next thing they fully consciously remembered was they were driving down the highway again, and they proceeded home.
When the Hills noticed the time, they realized that about 2 hours had elapsed that neither of them could account for. That was just the beginning of a mystery that would soon unravel. For nearly 2 years after their experience, the Hills had troubling nightmares. They went to several medical specialists and eventually were referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a highly respected Boston psychiatrist and neurologist with an extensive background in hypnotic therapy.
Dr. Simon told us these UFO people had caused us to have amnesia. And Dr. Simon removed the amnesia so that we could remember clearly all that had happened. They took us on board the craft, their craft, and we were taken into separate rooms. They were very human looking. They had 2 arms, 2 legs. The only difference basically were their facial features. The noses were very, very small. Almost no nose. Small lips, small nose. They examined my eyes, ears, nose, throat, skin, hair, and all. And then I was put on a table where they scraped my skin in an attempt to find out if our skin was alike or different.
Hill says an alien conducted sexual experiments on them. They took semen from Barney. Betty may have had eggs extracted.
He tried to insert a needle-like instrument in my navel, which caused pain, so he stopped doing it. And I was grateful for that.
Years later, Betty Hill produced the first alleged eyewitness depiction of the Greys since ancient drawings and carvings. They portrayed the alien leader, who showed her a tantalizing clue to indicate where they came from.
I asked him where he was from, and he showed me a star map.
In a hypnotherapy session, a few years after her encounter, Betty drew a map of an alien star system. At the time, experts could not identify it. But then in 1966, Marjorie Fish, an enterprising ufologist and amateur astronomer, became fascinated by Betty Hill's star map. Fish spent the next 7 years examining the map and constructing models, trying to match it to a known star system.
It was only later, when a new star was discovered, that they found exactly what Betty had drawn on the star map.
In 1973, after reviewing 23 star models, Marjorie Fish claimed to have found a fit. She declared that Betty Hill had drawn a star system some 40 light years from Earth, Zeta Reticuli. At the California Institute of Technology, Dr. Charles Beichman, one of the world's foremost astronomers, examined Zeta Reticuli.
We have no way that to possibly travel that far. We don't know of any way for any solid vehicle to go that sort of a distance. But relatively speaking, within the scale of the galaxy, it's a very nearby star.
In a conventional Earth-based space shuttle, it would take nearly 1.5 million years to reach Zeta Reticuli. In addition to his duties with the California Institute of Technology and the Jet Propulsion Lab, Dr. Beichman is a leading member of NASA's Origins program. Their mission is to probe space for signs of life. He concedes that life is possible in the universe, maybe even on Zeta Reticuli.
Here we're looking at the two stars in the Zeta Reticulum system, about 40 light years away. The binary stars could well have planets around stars like this. The system is old enough that, in fact, you could have a stable life having evolved on any habitable planets in those systems. Again, prospects good. What do we know today? Nothing.
With just tantalizing evidence, but no definitive proof that the Greys actually come from Zeta Reticuli, Betty Hill's case continues to be hotly debated. However, skeptics and believers can agree that since that night in September 1961, hundreds of alien abductions have been reported.
Just as a disease is contagious, so can an idea be contagious and spread from person to person.
Did Betty Hill really meet aliens from Zeta Reticuli? Did they conduct reproductive experiments as part of an evil agenda? Are the people claiming to have been abducted reporting the truth?
They're dreaming with their eyes open. So they have these hypnopompic, or upon awakening, hallucinations. That's the tactile sensations, the lights, the buzzing, and especially the sense of presence.
So many times the debunkers try to explain abductions as people simply mimicking and repeating stories that have been passed around over the years. Well, here's some people who had nothing to go by. Nobody had ever reported this, and yet their abduction experience is remarkably similar to what we hear from people even to this very day.
When the Betty and Barney Hill abduction story broke in the 1960s and was soon followed by many more, the general public became entranced with the idea that alien spaceships were visiting Earth and that extraterrestrials, known as the Greys, were abducting humans. But in 1969, the U.S. Air Force dismissed the accounts in an investigation codenamed Project Blue Book. The report concluded UFOs constituted no direct threat to the United States, and reports of unidentified flying objects were the result of a mild form of mass hysteria, or, quote, war nerves, hoaxers, publicity seekers, psychopathological persons, and the misidentification of various conventional objects.
And there is nothing in the records which would indicate that we have been visited by any advanced civilization.
With that, the U.S. Air Force declared the case closed. However, ufologists were not swayed by Project Blue Book then, and many still believe that the U.S. government has been involved in a cover-up of cosmic proportions since the Roswell case.
It really has to be said that Blue Book was nothing more than a PR effort by the Air Force to explain away UFO phenomenon.
I think early on in the 40s and 50s, when they began to learn, they meaning the government, that UFOs, extraterrestrials, were probably a reality, I think it scared them to death because, number one, they feared public panic, disruption of the social systems, religious systems, and they were loath to admit that they could not control the skies over the nation.
Try as the Air Force might to debunk UFOs again and again through the 50s and 60s, whoever's operating these UFOs didn't appear to read the Air Force reports because they kept showing up.
Ufologists argue that Project Blue Book cannot account for a large number of cases. Out of 12,618 UFO reports, 701 remain unsolved. One of the most intriguing unsolved cases took place at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico in 1964. According to the story, an alien spaceship landed at the base. Several grays emerged and were greeted by U.S. military personnel. It later became the basis for the famous closing sequence in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
This is absolutely, something we cannot confirm. However, it has to be said that a rumor of this came out immediately. An airman at Holloman Air Force Base who went into the town and started talking about this. And according to the accounts, he was highly distressed, very upset, didn't know what to do, and he was not seen again.
1984, two mysterious film canisters appeared, which would help perpetuate the claims of conspiracy theorists.
Jamie Chandray in 1984 received this package in the mail, which was undeveloped film. There were two sets of undeveloped film. One was given to Bill Moore and one was given to Jamie. And he, in turn, released this to the world, and it was an 8-page memo signed by Harry Truman.
Known as the Majestic 12 or MJ-12 documents, they suggested that on July 9, 1947, President Harry S. Truman appointed 12 high-ranking military and national security personnel and authorized them to conduct a covert mission, a top-secret research and development intelligence operation responsible directly and only to the President of the United States.
The large number of documents that I've been able to accumulate very clearly show that we have a covert program to keep from the public the recovery of a large number of crashes that include the recovery of extraterrestrials.
The Majestic 12 documents detail 4 types of spacecraft that the aliens use. They include disc, cigar, circular, and triangular-shaped crafts. But most intriguingly of all, within the pages of the MJ-12 documents, there is, for the first time in history, acknowledgement of alien beings that are known as the Greys. In these official-looking papers, they are called Extraterrestrial Biological Entities, EBEs.
There was a special operations manual called Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology, Recovery and Disposal. And in that manual, there was a 1-page description of 2 different types of extraterrestrial biological entities.
EBE Type 1 is said to be, quote, humanoid and might be mistaken for human beings. They are bipedal, 5 to 5 feet 4 inches in height, and weigh 80 to 100 pounds. Cranium is somewhat larger and more rounded. The eyes are small, wide-set, almond-shaped. EBE Type 2 is said to be, quote, 3 feet 5 inches to 4 feet 2 inches and weighs 25 to 50 pounds. Skeptics, however, claim that the MJ-12 documents are an elaborate hoax.
These were bogus. These were dummied up documents somebody made using an old typewriter and finding a signature off of a genuine Truman document and cutting and pasting and re-photocopying, and they're obvious and provable forgeries and fakes.
If these are faked, it is what you call an inside job, and that is a government job. Someone who had access to information that was restricted at the very least.
Even more mysterious papers emerged in the 1980s with riveting new details about the Greys. The Dulce papers, perhaps, were the most sensational. Released in 1987, they allege that the U.S. government is actually in collusion with the Greys in exchange for highly advanced technology. These unsubstantiated documents allege there is an underground facility somewhere in the New Mexico desert where the Greys are secretly enacting their evil agenda.
They're using us for breeding because they have fertility problems. We don't know how they reproduce. We know they don't have genitals.
Those who subscribe to this theory say the Greys abduct young, pregnant women.
Then within the first 3 months, first trimester, the pregnancy spontaneously just terminates. There's no bleeding, there's no spontaneous abortion, there's no regular abortion, there's none of that, and all of a sudden, it stops.
Believers say the extraterrestrials extract the unborn child from the victims and use them for their alien-human hybrid program.
These fetuses, if you will, are somehow kept by the ETs in usually these tanks, we call them. They're kept in fluid, and then they're somehow raised to be adults.
The release of these and other documents, coupled with new sightings, fueled the public's appetite for more information. People alerted to the phenomenon looked to the skies for signs of mysterious crafts and beings from an alien planet.
There's no question that the UFO research field really exploded during the 1980s. It's an amazing phenomenon. You have, for the first time, widespread discussion of abductions. At the same time, the UFO phenomenon became a major part of U.S. popular culture, world popular culture at that time.
It is very much debatable, but some say the term Grey was first used in the 1980s to describe the extraterrestrials that are abducting humans and conducting reproductive experiments.
The term itself, Grey, used to describe these beings, seems to have become more common by the early and mid-1980s. I don't believe that it was common before that period of time.
But do the Greys actually exist, or are they, in reality, a product of pop culture?
The question arises, what happened, and to what extent does life imitate art or the reverse? It's hard to unsort some of this mess. It is my belief that there is a true core of reality to the UFO phenomenon.
Ufologists insist that the Earth may be in the midst of a diabolical invasion of Greys. As the 21st century unfolds, the numbers of alleged Grey alien abductions, according to members of the UFO community, are rising. There is no way to verify these numbers, but one unofficial poll conducted by the Roper organization puts the number of alien abductions at 4 million.
I think the problem a lot of people have with the Greys in general is that they don't believe in UFOs to start with, so therefore they're not going to believe in something like abductions. But if you were to acknowledge the reality of UFOs as something non-human, suddenly the reality of something like Greys is not all that outrageous, it seems to me.
Eyewitnesses who swear they have encountered Greys are the primary source for all the information about these extraterrestrials. They report some commonalities that may reveal the true nature of the aliens' agenda.
There's always a light that comes from nowhere. It's either like an amber or a blue.
Then the frightened abductees report being surrounded and paralyzed by the alien creatures.
They're not just making you immobile. They put you almost in like a comatose state.
I've had occasions where I've been able to communicate with them to an extent which is a mixture of them speaking in a sense that seems to be telepathic.
Some even claim the Greys will often whisk their human prize away into space.
And you find yourself in, for lack of a better word, an alien environment where there's lots of light, everything is very poetic is almost the word to use to describe the environment because it feels very surreal.
Abductees say that once on board, the Greys perform medical examinations, which some describe as being extremely painful.
There were experiences which to me suggested that there was a biological, reproductive element of my experiences, and that's commonly widespread. So I'm not ashamed in reporting that.
If the Greys are actually here, what's their real agenda?
A lot of people think that they're coming to totally destroy us, and some people think that, and some people think that there are others coming to help us not be destroyed.
Hypnotherapist and self-proclaimed alien hunter Daryl Sims has been studying the abduction phenomenon for more than 30 years and believes he has uncovered the Greys' true mission. He specializes in recovering repressed traumatic memories from people who claim to have been abducted by aliens.
One of the things you would do in the beginning with these people is to relax them completely, and the tone of my voice changes totally.
Just focus on the sound of my voice. You'll find the sound of my voice causing your eyes to get heavier.
The sound of my voice will comfort you. It'll protect you. And it's okay for you to relax completely.
One of his clients, Donna Lee, is the president of the Houston UFO Network. She believes she has been abducted many times by the Greys. In the course of hypnotherapy sessions with Daryl Sims, she has recalled numerous terrifying encounters. She even believes the Greys took her unborn child.
I never had anything involved that would have been a miscarriage. I was about 8 weeks pregnant. Then it was just gone. I mean, I did not have the bleeding that's involved. Nothing.
In a later regression session, Lee recalled being in a brightly lit, sterile room.
They brought a young girl into the room and left her there with me. And she was a hybrid, what we consider a hybrid, although she looked a lot like me. Her hair was, she had really bad hair though, but she looked a lot like me. And she was about the age that my child would have been at that point.
Lee claims the hybrid child was about 9 years old.
She sat there. I had that realization in that moment when they left me there with her and she looked at me that I know you. I know you. And it was this very sad, almost overwhelming sadness. For a while, I would still recall that longing for that again.
To many experts, accounts of alien abductions are merely a product of an overactive mind. They say under hypnosis, subjects are open to suggestions.
What happens under hypnosis is that people will generate imagery that they will often mistake for memories of things that actually happen rather than things that they're just producing. Second point is that when people recover these sorts of quote-unquote memories under these hypnotic regression sessions, they tend to credit them as being true.
Are the earnest memories of abductees real or imagined?
They come in without permission. They touch your body. They take your children.
You want to scream, but I mean, my mouth is open and nothing has come out. It's paralysis, but walking paralysis.
Do the Greys exist? And if so, are they on a devious mission? In 2003, a team of psychologists from Harvard University believed they found the answer. Led by Dr. Richard J. McNally, they conducted a unique experiment to measure the physiological responses, like heart rate and perspiration levels, of various types of trauma victims.
We wanted to see whether people who've recovered memories of space alien abduction would show the same reactions, post-traumatic-like reactions, as do real trauma patients. Our research group has been studying people with recovered memories of traumatic events. And one of the big challenges that we've had is distinguishing between those individuals who've recovered memories of, for example, childhood sexual abuse, or actually genuine memories, versus memories that were perhaps false memories.
Dr. Scott Orr directed the lab tests.
What this procedure involves is an individual coming in to the lab, sitting down with one of our counselors, and then describing a variety of experiences that they've had. We wire them up with recording electrodes so we can measure heart rate and skin conductance and facial EMG.
In the lab, test subjects then listen to a 30-second audio tape of their own traumatic or abduction experience.
You are lying naked, strapped to a metal table in the spaceship. There are alien beings hovering over the table. They are staring at you with their large, dead, black eyes. You are absolutely terrified.
And then they open their eyes and they make self-reports of emotional experiences that they had while imagining the scene. So we asked them to rate how much arousal they felt, how vivid the scene was for them, how in control they felt, how pleasant or unpleasant they felt, how much fear, how much sadness, a variety of different emotional experiences.
The Harvard psychologists found that the alien abductees exhibited a high tendency of a personality trait called absorption.
Absorption is this ability to generate vivid imagery. When you go to the movie, you become moved by it emotionally. When you read a novel, it comes alive before your eyes. You become entranced by a sunset. You become lost in daydreaming and fantasy. They're especially high on this, and this is related to the ability to generate rich and realistic imagery.
The study further concluded that in most cases, the abductees are not lying.
They really genuinely believe that the alien narrative accounts for the experiences that they've had, that they're sincere. They're not quote-unquote crazy. Now, these particular events are sleep paralysis episodes. These things are really normal events. They don't indicate pathology. But what happens during rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep, the stage of sleep when we do most of our dreaming, we're entirely paralyzed. When you combine all of these things together, you have yourself a space alien abductee.
However, a former McNally test subject believes the Harvard study is fatally flawed.
It might be that alien encounters do involve an altered state of consciousness, but to write them off as fantasy, I think is a dire mistake, and that's where he goes wrong. I myself have had sleep paralysis. I know that the sensations are superficially similar to that of alien contact. Although there are similarities, it doesn't go far enough to account for it.
But if Boucher and his fellow abductees are right, and the Greys really do exist, then they must come to Earth from somewhere. If not from Zeta Reticuli, then where?
It's a 2,500-year-old question, goes back to the ancient Greeks who asked, is there life beyond the Earth? And now we're bringing the tools of 21st century science and technology to answer what simply is a very old question. There ought to be 1, 10, 100, or 1,000,000 intelligent civilizations out there for us to be talking with.
People who claim to have been abducted believe that intelligent alien life forms not only exist, but are already here. And they have crossed the cosmos with a purpose.
I think the Greys' agenda is to make a better future for their children. I think it's that simple. And I think that part of that agenda entails also ensuring that humanity is also going to continue. I think it's a mutually beneficial agenda.
Psychologists maintain, however, that the alien phenomenon is a product of overactive imaginations.
The Greys, in my view, are in fact hypnopompic visual hallucinations that occur when people are arising out of a sleep paralysis episode.
And their purpose for coming to Earth?
They don't have one, they're hallucinations. It's good to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out.
Is the Greys' agenda real or imagined? Alien abduction, fact or fiction?
It's still a mystery, just like most abductions. They're never going to tell you why they're here, or who they are, or why they do what they do.
Is it possible that ETs exist?
I think they're here, and they've been here for a long time.
It's a mystery that has haunted a community for decades. Something strange is seen plunging into the water of Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia on the evening of October 4th, 1967.
Cases like Shag Harbor are definitely something unconventional. They're not easily explained or explained away.
Something was there in the sky and it was lit up and the lights was on and it came down.
There are dozens of eyewitnesses, but few explanations.
A lot of people saw something go into the water, and no one has ever given a cause or name to it.
Local fishermen, the Coast Guard, and Navy divers search, but are unable to find any evidence of a crash.
We couldn't believe that there was nothing. There was no debris, there was not so much as a tin can.
It was something that had never happened before. They didn't know what to think.
The town is left in a state of uncertainty, and with no official explanation from the Canadian authorities, rumors of a government cover-up begin to emerge.
I guess there was a considerable amount of secrecy about the whole mission because they didn't reveal anything to us. I think everybody that night had a feeling that they were keeping something from us, but we didn't know what it was.
But an investigation 25 years later produces declassified government documents and some startling revelations.
What bothers me about it is that we're being treated like children and we're not supposed to know this.
It's one of those cases that defines UFO reality.
In the next hour, eyewitnesses, UFO researchers, and recently uncovered government documents will shed new light on the most comprehensive and mysterious UFO case in Canada's history. October 4th, 1967. Something unusual is happening in the skies over the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. During the waning hours of the evening, dozens of people are confounded by a series of inexplicable lights in the sky. It's a date that will later become known as the Night of the UFOs.
It was a clear night, the stars were out. It was a cold night, there was a light wind. A beautiful night. Starlight.
The night of October the 4th, 67, stuck with me for several reasons, and perhaps primary is the principle that seeing is believing.
At 10 p.m. in the town of Dartmouth, 12-year-old Chris Stiles is getting ready for bed and takes one last look out his bedroom window. He is dumbfounded at what he sees.
I saw a strange orange light that was moving along the shoreline, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen. It was dim and hard to discern any detail. So I quickly grabbed my jacket, ran out the front door, and went down to the waterfront to get a better look.
A quick sprint past the warehouses brings Stiles face to face with the mysterious apparition.
When I got to the waterfront, what I saw was a strange orange sphere, perhaps 60 feet through. And it was the color of an iron poker when it first glows in a fireplace if you let it get hot long enough. It was hovering, following the shoreline, perhaps 10 feet over the water, made no sound. I was quite fearful, and after a time ran from the scene.
The object drifts across the harbor as Stiles flees the area. But the initial shock leaves an indelible impression.
I knew in my life, at 12 for the first time, what real fear was.
Stiles' encounter with the UFO is only the prelude to a flurry of sightings that explode throughout Nova Scotia that night. 1 hour later, the small fishing village of Shag Harbor on the southern tip of the peninsula begins to erupt with similar sightings. 18-year-old fisherman Laurie Wickens is driving home with 3 friends when something odd in the sky catches his attention.
We was on our way to Woods Harbor, and through Shag Harbor, just past the post office, we happened to look out through the window and we see a light, and there was 2 on, then 3 on, then there was 4 on. It seemed to be flying along like just level. A yellowish orangish color, I guess the color of the lights was.
Racing west along Highway 3, Wickens attempts to keep the strange lights in view. But the noiseless objects begin descending at a 45-degree angle and drop below the tree line.
Seemed to be going along with us, and then when we got to the bottom of the hill, we lost sight of it.
A few miles away, 18-year-old Norman Smith is riding home with a friend through Bear Point Woods and sees something similar in the sky.
We were chasing the girls, and we were coming on our way home, and when we first noticed the lights in the sky.
The sight of the strange illuminated shapes is enough to make them pull over and watch.
We stopped alongside the road. I got out, was looking at the lights. It was stopped in midair. There was 5 lights. The lowest light to the ground was like if you were looking at a full moon, and then the next one just kept getting smaller, the next one smaller. There was no sound, you couldn't hear anything.
Smith gazes at the lights for a few moments as curiosity grows into unsettling concern.
I know I was frightened because I didn't know what it was. Never seen lights like that before in my life.
Down the road, Laurie Wickens and his friends are still in hot pursuit of the strange object. They suddenly see a bright flash and hear a whistling sound like a falling bomb. They believe it may be falling into the harbor, so they speed toward the waterfront.
The minute we come over the top of the hill, we could see the light in the water. At the time, we thought it was a plane.
Wickens pulls into a vacant parking lot by the shore to get a better look.
The light we see in the harbor looked like a half a globe, a yellowish colored light. We could see it drifting down the harbor. That was the first thing coming to mind, is go call the RCMP and report that we'd seen a plane crash, because that's what we thought it was.
Wickens returns to his car, races to the nearest payphone, and calls the regional headquarters of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the country's national police force. It is known throughout Canada as the RCMP. The corporal on duty answers the call at 11:25 and hears Wickens' excited voice.
The Mounties wanted to know what we was drinking, and we said we wasn't drinking, and wanted to know the number for the phone booth.
After listening to Wickens' story, the RCMP officer on duty is skeptical, but as soon as he hangs up, other calls start pouring in. The calls come in from nearby Bear Point, Cape Sable Island, and Maggie Garren's Point, all reporting the same thing. With so many witnesses, the RCMP has no choice but to take this seriously.
We got in the car to leave, and then he called back and wanted to know where he could meet us so we could see it in the water. And I told him we'd be by the moss plank, because that's where it was, right off of there.
Meanwhile, eyewitness Norman Smith is also busy alerting people about the mysterious object above the harbor.
We drove up to my father's place, and I ran in the house, got my father, and he came outdoor. We stood looking at the lights in the sky, and it wasn't too long, probably a couple of minutes, when we see the police car coming and its red lights flashing.
Smith follows the speeding police cruiser to a shoreside parking lot where a crowd of witnesses has gathered.
When we got there, there was, I think, 16 people, including the police officers. And they were local people. They all seen the lights come down to the ground and they watched it land in the water.
Civilians and the RCMP officers on the scene observed the dull yellow-orange light drifting 300 yards from shore.
It was totally dark. All you could see was the lights, and it was on the water.
We watched the light for probably 10 minutes as it was drifting down the harbor. We walked to the top of the hill, and then the light just went out. It just disappeared.
Everyone is convinced that they have just witnessed a plane crash. At 11:38 p.m., one of the officers puts a call through to the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, the branch of the Canadian military that organizes search and rescue operations. The Coast Guard cutter in nearby Clark's Harbor is also contacted. Lighthouse keepers in the surrounding areas are put on alert.
I was on duty, just carrying out my regular surveillance of our navigational aids. Somewhere around midnight when I first got a call that they were searching for something that crashed in the harbor.
Meanwhile, the RCMP officers improvise their own rescue operation. They begin contacting local fishermen to commandeer boats to go out to the impact site. As word gets out, local residents spring into action.
Someone came to our door, and my husband jumped up and went to the door to see who was there. And it was a policeman. And he said that something had come down in the harbor and that they thought it was a plane. And they knew that his boat was at the wharf and he could get there in a hurry.
I was on my way home from babysitting where I was picked up by a local resident there. He had some urgency in his voice when he said, you've got to go with me because we've got to go search for possible survivors of a plane crash or something of that nature. We really didn't know what we were heading out for.
All we could do was try to get there as fast as we could, and we were rushing. We went down to the wharf, untied the lines, and got the boats clear, and we left there as fast as we could to get to the area.
It's now slightly before midnight. Two fishing boats with several volunteers motor out towards open water at full throttle. Crisscrossing patterns of searchlight beams paint the dark, still waters of the harbor as the search begins.
And what we were doing was looking for something on the water, debris is what we were thinking.
The mood on the boats is tense as the would-be rescuers brace themselves for a grisly scene of floating body parts and plane wreckage. What they actually encounter is even more bizarre.
We came into this foam on the water. It was like orange foam that was on the water, like bubbly foam.
Quite a long streak of it. It was just more or less floating on the water. And what it was, I don't know.
The fishermen realized that the mysterious foam is connected to whatever crashed into the harbor. Norman Smith attempts to get a sample of the peculiar substance.
We circled the boat around, we came back into the foam. When we came back into it, I took a small dip net and dipped the dip net down into the water, right into the foam. When I pulled the dip net up out of the foam, there was nothing. You couldn't see nothing, totally nothing on the dip net. I've been fishing all my life and I never ever seen anything like that. I've been up rivers and on lakes and out on the ocean and never ever see foam like that on the water.
The strange foam soon melts back into the dark water. But even more puzzling than the foam is the lack of any debris at the site. If something has just crashed into Shag Harbor, it seems to have completely vanished.
We had thought that whatever it was, it just sunk. And I was, like you, kind of expecting to find some debris, but there was nothing.
We were out there pretty near all night and circling around and looking for anything else that was on the water, any debris or anything, and we never found nothing. There was not so much as a tin can.
The confusion among the fishermen in Shag Harbor is shared by the individuals back at the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. The RCC checks with the Air Traffic Control Center in Moncton, New Brunswick, and the NORAD Control Center in North Bay, Ontario, to determine whether any civilian, commercial, or military aircraft is missing. The reports of an aircraft crashing into Shag Harbor do not mesh with the data they get back.
They realize that this is not a downed aircraft. None are missing. They're looking for something unconventional. They're starting to realize that perhaps this is some unknown object from space.
The residents are certain that something fell into the dark waters of Shag Harbor, but no one seems to know what it is. Shag Harbor is a small, unassuming fishing village on the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia. It's so inconspicuous that it does not appear on some maps. That is all about to change on October 4th, 1967. Several local residents report what they believe to be a plane crashing into the harbor. The sightings begin a chain of events that will make headlines around the world. Within hours of the initial reports, local fishermen, police officers, and the Coast Guard scour the waters of the harbor throughout the night, but find no wreckage or debris. As the sun rises the next day, the community is gripped by apprehension and uncertainty.
I think everybody that night had a feeling that they were keeping something from us.
Word quickly circulates that no debris has been found. With no information coming from the authorities, speculation spreads like wildfire.
It was the talk of the community, you know, and it was a UFO, and of course, like everybody else, we wondered, I guess, what it could be.
People became fearful. They were wondering, would there be more? Would they tangle in our nets? Would it crash in our house? What's going on here? And they just weren't getting answers.
Finally, the Rescue Coordination Center issues a statement that rules out the possibility of a plane crash. At 10:20 a.m. on October 5th, the center sends a telex stamped priority to the Canadian Forces headquarters in Ottawa. The message outlines the sightings by the Shag Harbor residents and the RCMP officers. It refers to the thing in Shag Harbor as a dark object. More important, it labels the object in question as a UFO.
It's unique also in that, again, the term UFO is first used by the authorities who are searching and not by the eyewitnesses.
By the evening of October 5th, the Shag Harbor incident has become a military matter. After reviewing the telex from the Rescue Coordination Center, Squadron Leader William Bain sends an urgent message to the Canadian Maritime Command, Canada's naval headquarters for the Atlantic coast. It advises an immediate underwater search of the area. If the mysterious dark object left nothing floating in the sea, perhaps the dive teams can find something below the surface. Maritime Command responds by dispatching a team of divers from the Navy's Fleet Diving Unit in Halifax. They arrive on October 6th and begin diving off the deck of Coast Guard Cutter 101.
You get all kinds of rumors in a small village like this, and then when the Navy shows up with divers and stuff, where you know that they must have taken it seriously because so many people saw the event in the sky.
The divers section off an area of the harbor roughly 1/2 mile long by 1.5 miles wide.
Well, they'd go over the side and start doing square searches. They'll pick an area and normally stake it off with a buoy on the bottom. The visibility in the waters off Nova Scotia, it's so full of plankton and so on, is usually quite limited, you know, maybe 20 feet at the most.
It was a low-tech search, simply with handheld flashlights under the water.
They wouldn't let us anywhere near that area. We was out there in the boat all right, but we had to stay back away from where they were diving.
As the divers are scouring the depths of the harbor, the tiny fishing village is thrust into the media spotlight. On October 7th, a camera crew from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation arrives and films the divers in action. This is actual footage from their news coverage. Canada's major newspapers have also gotten wind of the strange happenings. Among the first to jump on the breaking story is journalist Ray McLeod of Halifax's Chronicle Herald newspaper.
I was one of the night reporters on duty at the Chronicle Herald when the assignment editor just called me over and said, there's a report of something going down in the harbor. A lot of people had seen it. Our CMP reported they'd seen it, and the newspaper wanted to find out what had crashed.
But when McLeod attempts to find out what went into the harbor, no one has any answers.
I started following up on what we got from RCMP and what we got from Search and Rescue, and that was they had no idea what had gone down. They had nothing missing. They had seen nothing drop off the radar screen anywhere in the area, and they were basically puzzled.
The lack of information surrounding the incident raises McLeod's curiosity and inspires him to launch his own investigation.
Anytime you don't know, it teases your imagination. You have to wonder why they don't know. When the armed forces and everyone was saying, we have no idea, we can't find anything, that's when I used one of my sources in the armed forces to get a number of someone in Ottawa.
McLeod's source refers him to Squadron Leader William Bain at the Air Desk in Ottawa, a division of the Royal Canadian Air Force in charge of investigating UFO cases. Bain's response to the Shag Harbor incident is surprising.
Just from what he'd heard so far, it looked like one of those few cases where there might be something concrete to the incident. And that, of course, was the quote that ended up in the headline of the paper.
On October 7th, 1967, McLeod's article makes the front page of the ultra-conservative newspaper, the Chronicle Herald. McLeod is as surprised as anyone to see it there.
And then the story came out, and my first reaction was, oh my God, what have I done? Okay, I never expected to see that screaming headline.
It was a headline in 2-inch red letters that looked more like something you would see in the National Enquirer. And that served to fuel, again, the rumor mill and the speculation.
The shockwaves of McLeod's article reverberate throughout the Canadian province and reach the depths of Shag Harbor, where the underwater search is in progress. On October 7th, Maritime Command orders 3 additional divers to the impact site. As the dives continue, the people of Shag Harbor want answers. None are forthcoming.
I guess there was a considerable amount of secrecy about the whole mission because they didn't reveal anything to us. Some people were told that they weren't allowed to speak about it.
We thought that in a few days' time we was going to be hearing, yes, there was a plane that went down, it was on the bottom of the ocean, or whatever it was that they found. We thought that in a few days they were going to be telling us, but nobody ever did.
Maritime Command terminates the underwater search on October 8th. They announced that 3 days of searching the harbor have yielded nil results. 5 days after the sightings, the residents of Shag Harbor are no closer to understanding what crashed into the water the night of October 4th. But the end of the underwater search is just the beginning of a UFO case that is about to become even more perplexing. October 1967. After dozens of witnesses see something plunge into Shag Harbor on the southern tip of Nova Scotia, local fishermen comb the waters looking for clues, and Navy divers search beneath the surface. But the Canadian Navy abruptly cancels the search with no explanation, leaving the people of Shag Harbor to wonder and worry.
In a lot of our minds, it was a cover-up for something, but for them to spend that much time and effort and then give no explanation, it's like they were here today and gone tomorrow type of thing.
With no one providing any answers, the rumor mill begins to churn.
There was even a rumor at the time that they had found something.
We thought that there was times that they were bringing things up off of the bottom of the ocean.
The guy that had the divers in the area, he did admit that they did bring something up. Wrapped underwater, it was wrapped underwater. But I guess that was kept for secret.
Speculation was rampant, but speculation is always rampant when you don't give someone an explanation.
During the 1960s, speculation about UFOs and other unexplained events often turns to the Cold War. The nuclear standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union is at its height. The two superpowers are constantly seeking to trump each other by harnessing the latest military technology. Top secret exercises are common in the North Atlantic. The heated atmosphere produces anxieties that intensify concerns about the incident.
It was always in people's minds, and of course, this is just a few years after the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things, so, this added fuel to the fire.
And then, of course, people start coming up with theories. Maybe it was a secret American device of some sort, a plane, a satellite that went into the water? Or was it a Russian object?
Night reporter Ray McLeod helps break the news about Shag Harbor by writing a front-page article in Halifax's Chronicle Herald newspaper. As McLeod prepares to follow up on the story, he receives some startling and discouraging news.
There was a note on my typewriter to see the managing editor. And I was told, don't follow up this story. We think this story should be handled by someone on Dayside because a lot of the contacts are easier to get in the day and we want to follow this up thoroughly. So we've given the story to David Bentley. You're off the story.
McLeod asserts that Bentley confers with scientists and academics to downplay the UFO angle.
He pursued talking to people who basically poo-pooed the story and told everybody there's nothing to it, it was all right.
Among Bentley's chief sources is one of Canada's most outspoken UFO debunkers, an astronomer named Father Burke Gaffney.
The late Father Michael Burke Gaffney was a Jesuit priest. He was an astronomer. He was a UFO skeptic. He took a very dim view of what the UFO phenomena possibly could be. And in statements to the press, he would downplay that interest.
In a public lecture a few weeks after the Shag Harbor sightings, Burke Gaffney tries to alleviate any lingering concerns about what happened that night by arguing that 94% of all UFO sightings can be explained by meteorites, simple mirages, and other natural phenomena. With UFO skeptics having their say, McLeod begins to wonder what happened to squadron leader William Bain, the source at the Canadian military, quoted as saying that there might be something concrete to the Shag Harbor incident.
I asked Bentley why he wasn't following up on Squadron Leader Bain. And Bentley told me that he was told the man didn't exist and there was no such office in Ottawa, and to leave that angle in the story alone.
Is the Chronicle Herald bowing to pressure from the Canadian government? McLeod ultimately realizes that the side of the story he began to pursue would never make it into the newspapers.
I feel badly in some ways that I couldn't have used my talent and my contacts and my belief that the people have a right to know to keep plugging away until we found out what was going on. A journalist feels empty when they have to do that, but then again, sometimes you have to do that.
Soon, news of Canada's Shag Harbor sightings travels across the border and reaches renowned physicist Dr. Edward Condon and his team at the University of Colorado. Condon and his committee are working under a $500,000 contract from the United States Air Force and putting together an independent scientific assessment of unexplained UFO phenomena.
The Condon report was striving to gather a certain amount of case studies in other countries around the world internationally to see whether the United States Air Force should continue investigating reports of unidentified flying objects. And the Shag Harbor incident came to their attention.
They have deep resources and a distinguished staff, but according to eyewitness Chris Stiles, Condon and his committee do not dedicate much time or effort to the puzzling Shag Harbor case.
The case was turned over to an electrical engineer called Norman Levine. He made a few calls to RCMP headquarters in Ottawa and to Maritime Command, but was assured by them that they had done a complete and thorough search. It's unfortunate that he didn't pursue that path, because God knows what he would have found.
Canada's Shag Harbor incident is one of 59 major UFO cases around the world that Condon's team selects to include in their study. They submit the final report to the Air Force on October 31st, 1968. But case number 34 receives only a few paragraphs in the 900-page tome. The report defends the lack of initiative in Shag Harbor by arguing no further investigation by the project was considered justifiable. This conclusion of the Shag Harbor case is consistent with Condon's overview of UFO research. Our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge.
I think one of the things that happens when a serious scientific study is carried out to look at the UFO situation in specific cases, there's often a criteria that's very formal and rigid, And often what happens is the best cases somehow, no matter how you use your definitions, no matter how careful you are, will slip through the cracks. And I believe that's what happened to Shag Harbor.
With no one pushing for answers, Canada's Shag Harbor incident becomes another unexplained mystery that is all but forgotten.
It quickly faded from the headlines and became a back page story, and a month later it would have been hard to find anything on it, and people went home, made a sandwich, went to work, life went on.
But 25 years later, a new investigation is launched into the Shag Harbor incident. This time, some startling revelations make it clear that the book should never have been closed on this case. In October of 1967, over a dozen witnesses see a UFO plunge into Shag Harbor, Canada. 25 years later, unanswered questions remain.
That's where it all took place, right out there. We knew that something came down out of the air and something landed in the water, but what it was, we didn't know.
One of the other eyewitnesses that night cannot forget what he saw over the harbor. Chris Stiles had seen the UFO from his home in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. In 1992, while watching TV one night, everything would change.
I had watched a rebroadcast of the Unsolved Mysteries episode that dealt with the Roswell incident. And it made me think about Shag Harbor. And what I remembered and what was so tantalizing about Shag Harbor was that there was no denial that the authorities believed that this was a genuine UFO incident. And it had simply faded from memory.
Stiles decides to launch his own investigation into Shag Harbor. He requests documents from the Canadian National Archives and the Department of National Defence using Canada's Access to Information Act. In a few weeks, the government documents arrive on spools of microfilm at the main branch of the Halifax Library. A tedious search begins.
As you sit at the viewer and start going through document after document, you realize that often these collections were compiled by bureaucrats who threw away nothing.
The microfilm contains thousands of documents of UFO cases across Canada from 1965 to 1981.
You're looking for an extraterrestrial straw in a terrestrial haystack.
Stiles spends weeks at the microfilm viewer until he hits pay dirt. It was all there. Priority telexes from the Rescue Coordination Center to the Canadian Forces Headquarters. Instructions from the Canadian Maritime Command to the Atlantic Fleet Diving Unit. And reports by dozens of witnesses. Stiles realizes that he is looking at the biggest UFO event in Canada's history.
And I only saw one that had UFO written on it with 3 big letters, underlined 3 times, and that had to do with the Shag Harbor incident. I knew very early on that I had primary documents and a paper trail a mile wide here.
Has Chris Stiles stumbled upon a Canadian government cover-up? Stiles decides he needs help. He contacts fellow UFO researcher Don Ledger to assist with his investigation.
Chris Stiles was very passionate about Shag Harbor. He'd been at it for about a year to a year and a half at that point, researching it, digging out the documents and so on. And he was infectious, eventually dragged me into it as well.
A careful examination of these declassified documents paints a vivid timeline of the events and helps bring the night of October 4th, 1967 back to life.
I was very impressed with the paper trail for the Shag Harbor incident. It just pretty much laid out the whole thing.
For Stiles, the documents also suggest that the Canadian military knew more than they were telling.
I think what surprised me most was how comfortable these military people seemed with the possibility that they might actually be looking for an object of extraterrestrial origin. In a sense, it was kind of an acknowledgement of UFO reality.
Stiles uncovers documents that demonstrate that the sightings of October 4th were not confined to Shag Harbor alone. Reports came in from witnesses from all over Nova Scotia that night. He then comes across eyewitness testimony from an unexpected but extremely reliable source, experienced airline pilots. At 7:15 p.m. on October 4th, 1967, 2 pilots on Air Canada Flight 305 are flying at an altitude of 12,000 feet over southeastern Quebec. Captain Pierre Charbonneau and First Officer Robert Ralph glance out of the left cockpit window and see something astounding.
What they saw that night was a large, round, colored object in the sky that looked like, to them, like a kite with a tail on it. It was off their left wing and just slightly above their altitude.
The experienced pilots are at a loss. They observe the strange shape for several minutes when suddenly they see a series of explosions. According to their testimony, they begin to take evasive action when the UFO disappears into a wisp of clouds. After some deliberation, the pilots decide to file official reports about the bizarre occurrence.
It's not common for pilots to go on record and report a UFO, particularly commercial pilot, because of maybe some recrimination later on from his employers, or maybe some ridicule from his peers.
Continuing his research, Stiles uncovers more information from an unexpected source. At St. Mary's University in Halifax, Stiles finds a treasure trove of X-Files collected by none other than the UFO skeptic who had downplayed the Shag Harbor incident in the press, Father Burke Gaffney.
And an X-file is not just a secret file, but a file that is not admitted to by the originating agency. So it was great that they were there because there was no record of these in Ottawa, either at National Archives or RCMP headquarters.
The RCMP X-Files collected by Burke Gaffney provide more telling details about the night of October 4th. One report includes the testimony of a ship captain named Leo Mercy.
He's the captain of a fishing dragger that has 18 men. It's off the coast of Sambor, Nova Scotia. And it's got 4 UFOs in the distance in a box pattern.
And he looked at them, and then he went and he checked and he found them on radar.
But Mercy's report contains something even more puzzling, a reference to another underwater search near Shelburne, 31 miles northeast of Shag Harbor.
His statement in this X-file, he says, perhaps it's like the thing they're looking for down off Shelburne or off Shag Harbor. So this would seem that there was indeed a second simultaneous search effort.
Did the UFO somehow travel away from Shag Harbor after it crashed? As it happens, the town of Shelburne is also home to a former Canadian military base. Is it somehow connected to the secrecy surrounding the Shag Harbor sightings? In fact, during the 1960s, the Shelburne facility was officially called an Oceanographic Institute, but its real identity was shrouded in Cold War intrigue. In its heyday, it served as a top-secret listening post to track Soviet submarine movements in the North Atlantic Ocean for the U.S. Navy.
A Soviet submarine would come out in the Atlantic from Russia and go on its tour. They would pick up the engine noises and the hull sounds made by the submarine passing through the water on the microphones. This would be fed into a computer so they could get a match later on for if the same submarine came out.
Could the Canadian authorities have used this submarine tracking technology to locate a submerged UFO? Was the Navy secretly searching the waters off Shelburne while all eyes were focused on Shag Harbor? To continue his investigation, Stiles sets out to track down those who would know best, the divers who actually probed the depths of Shag Harbor. On October 4th, 1967, Chris Stiles was one of many witnesses who saw something strange in the skies over Nova Scotia. Now he is on the hunt to try to find out what it was. He has uncovered declassified government documents indicating that the Canadian military was involved in an intense search for a UFO that apparently crashed into Shag Harbor. The Canadian authorities assert that nothing was found, but Stiles begins to suspect that the divers may hold the key to the mystery.
A number were unwilling to talk, but a few were. And they told a very interesting tale that went well beyond what was in the press clippings.
April 9th, 1993. One of the divers agrees to an interview with Stiles, but demands that his identity be kept anonymous. Stiles is shocked when the diver informs him that they did indeed find something underwater, but it was not in Shag Harbor.
He eventually explained that By the time divers had arrived in Shag Harbor, they knew the object was no longer there, that indeed it had come to rest on the seabed 25 miles away, off Government Point near the Shelburne base.
Had the UFO eluded the search efforts at Shag Harbor by traveling underwater under its own power up the coast of Nova Scotia? If true, this would mean that the Canadian military conducted a secret search at Shelburne that was then concealed from the public. The divers' new revelation is confounding to Stiles.
I found the Shelburne story very troubling. You know, there were a lot of things that were certain. We had government documents, but now there was a black box element to the case. And at first I was very wary of it, very dubious of the claim.
Now Chris Stiles is wondering if the naval search at Shag Harbor was just an elaborate decoy for the real search the diver is now telling him about. When pressed for details, the diver's story becomes even more incredible.
When the divers were dispatched to the Shelburne location, they dove over the object and found that indeed there was, in fact, even a second object there, which they described as lending assistance to the first. I didn't know what to make of this. This is well beyond events in the Shag Harbor incident.
The diver informs Stiles that a flotilla of U.S. Navy and Canadian ships actually anchored over the two objects at Shelburne and monitored their activities.
And as he said, when he dove, him and a partner, they were shocked to find there was still activity going on, and they indeed saw beings.
They were on the bottom, and they watched what they thought was creatures from one object giving aid to the other object.
The Canadian diver's story does not end there. He says that the Navy flotilla observed the two UFOs for 7 days. Suddenly, the operation was interrupted by a Russian submarine crossing into Canadian territorial waters. At this critical juncture, the Navy ships were diverted to intercept the sub.
They attempt to intercept the Soviet sub, trying to cut it off. And it's at this point, when they're doing this maneuver, that the two UFOs begin to move back toward the Gulf of Maine, and indeed, eventually, as reported, break the surface and fly away.
Are there any witnesses on record that can corroborate the diver's fantastic story? Did anyone see these two UFOs leaving the waters off Shelburne? Perhaps. At 10 o'clock on October 11th, 1967, exactly 1 week after the Shag Harbor sightings, the mysterious lights in the sky were seen once again, this time by a family in Lower Woods Harbor, 35 miles from Shelburne.
We look at what's known as the Lachlan Cameron sighting 1 week later, to the hour, and we see two sets of lights leaving the area of Shag Harbor and flying away. It fits the diver's story like a glove. It's hard to ignore that synchronicity.
And we are left to wonder, did an alien spacecraft really crash into Shag Harbor as the Navy diver suggests? Or could there be another explanation? An important clue to that question may still exist if what one former lighthouse keeper says is true.
The second day, I did find a cylinder. I knew it was something different, something I had never seen before. It was a cylinder type shape, 30 inches, 30 to 40 inches long maybe, 15, 18 inches in diameter. Had been partially burned, wires protruding, terrible odor.
After finding the cylinder on the rocky shore of Bon Portage Island, Banks says he notified the Canadian Department of Transportation. They informed him to carefully pack the object and deliver it to an American naval officer at Prospect Point Wharf.
It had to be something that they needed bad, wanted bad, because they flew him in from Virginia. Or that's just what he told me.
But what was inside the cylinder that was so urgent and so secret?
I was working for the federal government at the time, and I don't really feel comfortable answering it.
It's an ongoing mystery that continues to invite speculation. For some, the evidence points to the secret military experiments of the Cold War.
Theorized in my own mind that probably this was some kind of an experimental drone or something that they had back then. one of the first ones that they had that somehow got away from them. I think it was a surveillance type of thing, and it either crashed on its own or they crashed it.
My opinion was still it was a plane, American military plane.
Others contend that something capable of operating both above and below the water can only be extraterrestrial.
Even now in this time of stealth aircraft, we still don't have anything that's both aerodynamic and hydrodynamic.
What the object is, that's what everybody always wants to know. What was the object? Whatever went into the harbor that night was intelligently controlled, and it was of extraterrestrial nature.
It is unclear when, if ever, the complete set of military records will be released. If they are, will they shed light on this strange incident and maybe even settle once and for all what happened in Shag Harbor on October 4th, 1967? Until then, we are left with the mystery, speculation, and the fading memory of the people who saw something very unusual crash into the ocean that night.
Today, I still scan the sky looking for something that might be different or something like what I seen back 30-odd years ago. Only thing that I would like to know is what it was.
It's an explosive tale that's been lost among the sands and weeds of the Mexican desert.
There were rumors since long ago that an object crashed in Mexico.
In 1974, a mysterious incident took place that some say involved a UFO and a small plane on a collision course, followed by a race between two governments to recover the debris.
The Mexican recovery team finds a sort of a silver-shaped plastic disc.
The Mexican military recovered an object and had it on a truck, and something killed all the men.
The U.S. government responded very quickly and very organized. They've done this before.
But what happened in the Mexican desert is just the beginning of that country's UFO history.
The eclipse from July 11, 1991, it practically branded the modern era of UFOs in Mexico.
Over the last several decades, it has become a hotbed for UFO encounters.
When they picked up the object on radar, the first thing they did was start looking at it.
And everyone from pilots to politicians have been witness to sightings.
Would you say to the governor that he didn't see something strange in the sky?
In the next hour, eyewitness interviews, never-before-seen footage, and expert analysis try to solve the mystery of what really happened that day in the Mexican desert in 1974, and the rash of documented sightings ever since. Coyame, Mexico, a small town not found on many maps, a place swallowed up by the Mexican desert, home to more agave plants than people.
Coyame is situated in the northern part of the state of Chihuahua, and our municipality is 7,000 square feet. We have between 2,000 and 2,500 people. It's a calm place, a beautiful place.
A place with no library, no archives, and no local historian. But that doesn't mean it's a town without a history. Here, history is passed from neighbor to neighbor. And it's this oral history that gives testimony to an unsolved air collision that took place here just 3 decades ago. It began as a civilian plane took off from El Paso, Texas, en route to Mexico City.
August 25th, 1974. There was a plane that was coming out from El Paso. It was going to Mexico City, and it was an accident.
They say that there was a crash between a plane and a UFO within the territories of the municipality.
I don't think this could be made up. How could someone make this up? It's true.
August 25th, 1974, 10:07 p.m. It's a quiet summer's night in Koyame. The town's inhabitants are beginning to turn in. 500 miles away, United States air defense systems suddenly register an unknown flying object over the Gulf of Mexico. Streaking across the sky at over 2,500 miles per hour, at an altitude of 75,000 feet, only one thing is for certain. This is not something man-made. Initial indications are that it's probably nothing more than a meteor. But 60 seconds later, it becomes clear that this is no meteor.
This object was traveling and descending through steps, unlike that of a meteor. Again, it was more of an arc.
The object appears headed on a course towards Corpus Christi, Texas. American air defense systems are alerted. 10:09 p.m. The unidentified flying object now suddenly veers left and enters Mexican airspace just 40 miles south of Brownsville, Texas. The U.S. continues tracking the puzzling spacecraft as it now races over Mexico. Yet what isn't seen on radar is a small craft headed on a trajectory towards the UFO.
What's also interesting about this case is about the same time as this UFO was zigging and zagging, there was a plane that was leaving El Paso headed towards Mexico City.
Under the cover of night, the small civilian plane from El Paso heads towards Mexico's capital city. But the plane from Texas never reaches its destination. At the same time, the American military watches as their unidentified flying object disappears from radar. It appears that the unthinkable has happened. A UFO plane collision.
There's an assumption that there was a collision of some type where both the craft and the plane had collided.
August 26, 1974, 8 a.m. 9 hours after a civilian plane disappeared over the desert, a Mexican recovery team hunts for the downed craft. Across the border, American intelligence is listening in. At 10:35 a.m., the Americans intercept the Mexican military radio report. The wreckage of the missing plane has been spotted just outside Koyame. Moments later, another report shockingly announces the sighting of a second wreck, but this is no plane.
The Mexican recovery team finds a sort of a silver-shaped classic disc, some 16 feet 5 inches, about 5 feet thick, convex on both sides, sort of like a saucer.
The saucer's surface has the appearance of polished steel. It has no markings, no lights, and there are no bodies inside. However, it does appear to be damaged in 2 spots, possibly caused by a collision with the civilian plane and then falling to the ground. Immediately, Mexican officials declare a radio silence on all search activities. Meanwhile, U.S. officials reach out to the Mexican government, offering assistance in the recovery. Their offer is met with a denial.
The Mexican government denied it. They said, no, all we have is just a plane wreckage.
While the Mexican team collects the crash debris, the United States is busy assembling their own elite recovery force at Fort Bliss, Texas. The team includes 4 helicopters, 3 small Hueys, and a large Sea Stallion. Prepped and ready to move out, the team is placed on standby while U.S. surveillance scopes out the situation.
The U.S. was keeping tabs again through its what I call the spy surveillance network, through their satellite surveillance as well as airplanes that were flying over at low altitude.
American surveillance reveals that the Mexicans have placed the UFO on a flatbed truck and moved out from the crash site.
They were able to see there were a number of dead bodies, so which led them to believe that something very extraordinary had happened.
August 27th, 2:38 p.m. Unsure of what's happened, U.S. officials greenlight their rescue team. 4 helicopters with team members aboard depart Fort Bliss.
One of the things that seems obvious in this case is that the government, the U.S. government, responded very expertly, very quickly and very organized. They had this team that assembled in Fort Bliss, and in no time were down there on site recovering this. They've done this before.
But nothing will prepare the Americans for what they are about to find. Dressed in bioprotection suits, the American soldiers approach the silent convoy and find all the Mexicans dead. There is no time to investigate what killed the Mexican team, but ufologists have their theories.
They somehow came in contact with a lethal agent, a bacteriological agent that was from out of this world, or an extraterrestrial biological agent of some sort that killed them, which is my favorite theory.
The U.S. recovery team quickly tends to business. It finds the 16-foot wide silver UFO strapped to the back of a flatbed truck. The straps are reconfigured and connected to a cargo cable from the Sea Stallion helicopter. Safely secure, the estimated 1,500-pound disc is lifted up and headed back to the U.S. With the saucer gone, the team immediately turns their attention to the remaining evidence: the plane wreckage. Vehicles from the convoy and the Mexican team bodies are gathered.
They gathered the debris, the bodies from the Mexican recovery team, and then they exploded them with high explosives. The reason why is to hide the evidence.
Their work done, the recovery team heads back to base. Where the UFO was taken is unknown. Some have speculated Atlanta, Fort Bliss, or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
It is an unprecedented event, and I think it's comparable to what happened in Roswell, New Mexico.
If this 1974 UFO crash was real, there was no evidence to prove it. Only the passing down of the story from generation to generation kept the tale alive, but few took it seriously. That changed in 1991. That year, not one, not two, but dozens of UFO sightings are reported over Mexico. What gives the 1991 sightings credibility is that strangers reported seeing the same thing, at the same time, on the same day, and yet they were hundreds of miles apart from each other. For over 3 decades, the Mexican desert is alleged to have been the site of an incredible tale.
There were rumors since long ago that an object crashed in Mexico.
An object entered our atmosphere through the United States, and it crashed with a small plane.
For the last 2 decades, Mexico has witnessed UFO incidents that rival anything reported in the United States. Mexicans just needed one uniting event to keep their eyes focused to the sky. That happened in 1991. In July of that year, one of the longest solar eclipses in history is set to happen. The total eclipse is visible only in a narrow corridor that includes central Mexico.
A year in advance, all the Mexican people knew about the eclipse in '91. I mean, it was an event, it was a moment. All around Mexico, there were people waiting for the eclipse.
It was an important eclipse because even though there had been other eclipses that had taken place until that day, they were not on the magnitude of that eclipse.
Just after 1 p.m., the skies above Mexico darken. Astronomers adjust their telescopes. Millions gaze skyward. During 1991, consumer technology makes videos commonplace. On this day, many Mexicans use their cameras to capture the moon as it begins to pass in front of the sun. To their disbelief, they also capture something unexpected.
It was a curious thing. During the eclipse, I heard some people who were around us saying, "Look, what is that there also?"
Several people filmed and saw metallic objects that are clearly distinguished with the form of a cupola, on what is commonly called a flying object.
In Mexico City, in Tepeji del Rio, in Puebla, in Cerro de la Estrella. From all corners of Mexico come videos showing a strange metallic-looking object just below the eclipse. The eclipse UFOs, or ovnis as they are called in Mexico, become the talk of the country. But while some are quick to claim that Mexico experienced a UFO encounter, skeptics aren't buying it.
This was one of the great events of the century as far as eclipses and astronomical events. And hundreds and thousands of astronomers, professional and advanced amateur astronomers, came from all over the world, and it converged upon Mexico City and the other towns where the eclipse was visible. Not a single professional astronomer reported seeing anything that wasn't supposed to be there.
Professional astronomers immediately doubt any UFO claims and instead offer a more scholarly response.
When the sun is totally eclipsed, like it was in Mexico on that day, the bright stars and planets become visible for a few minutes. And Venus was very brilliant, and so it was very easy to see when people looked up. And I'm sure that many of the people thought that they saw a UFO.
Skeptics have their answer, but UFO believers have their doubts.
Because of that, because so many people recorded in different cities these objects, some suggested that had to be the star Venus. But Venus was in a different position than the UFOs were in the tapes.
It was something strange that happened during the eclipse. It's afterwards, when you start analyzing and looking at the videos, that you can start to see in some of them that there are movements that maybe wouldn't correspond to a planet. When you start analyzing more calmly after the fact, that's when you start to wonder if it could have been a UFO.
The 1991 sightings ignite a UFO explosion in Mexico.
The effect of the UFOs from the 1991 eclipse was like a snowball. And this allowed people with an interest in UFOs to record sightings more frequently.
While Mexico's UFO explosion comes as a surprise to most, some ufologists believe it was actually predicted over 1,000 years ago. The Maya were one of the great civilizations in history. For over 600 years, they built cities, constructed reservoirs and temple pyramids, and developed an incredible understanding of astronomy.
It is incredible the knowledge that the Maya had about the sky and the planets. They had a great capacity of observation, they knew the celestial movement, and were able to determine every single important event that was going to be registered in the sky.
The Maya recorded their information on foldable books called codices. Most of these texts were burned by Spanish priests during the 1500s. Today, just 4 Mayan codices remain. Among them is the Dresden Codex, a document that offers an enigmatic glimpse into the Mayans' astral wisdom.
It's pure astronomical, the moon, the sun, the systems, everything is there. Anybody who has studied and analyzed that consider this document a real treasure from the past.
Among the information contained in this codex is an eclipse prediction cycle.
The eclipse of 1991 appears in the Dresden Codex.
But did the Dresden Codex predict something more?
In it, they talk about the meeting with the Brothers of the Stars, which in our language we call extraterrestrials.
When I read this, after receiving all these videos, that struck me, that really affected me, because it's like if the Mayans knew long in advance that these sightings were going to take place that day. How can you explain that? Is that a coincidence, or they knew? I think they knew.
Over a century later, most Mexicans knew something out of the ordinary was happening. Their UFO wave had turned into a tsunami. Literally overnight, Mexicans are mesmerized by the apparent UFO wave striking their country. Ufologists point to the open-mindedness of the Mexican people as being partly responsible for this UFO explosion.
Mexicans have been fascinated by legends, stories, elves, fairies. That psychology and sociology allows Mexicans to keep an open mind when it comes to extraordinary occurrences. When you open yourself up to other possibilities, it is much easier to accept the UFO phenomena.
However, skeptics claim that Mexico's UFO wave is more of a social phenomenon than any actual increase in visits from little green men.
Sightings always seem to come in waves, and these waves are generally, they correlate with the publicity, that if the newspapers or TV stations, whatever, are filled with stories about UFO sightings, people will go out and pay much more attention to things that they see.
Since the earliest UFO sightings, witnesses have always been subject to heavy ridicule. They are portrayed as overzealous sky watchers who wouldn't know a DC-9 from a weather balloon. But what happens when the witness is someone who doesn't fit into these categories? What if the person has a solid reputation and career? What if the witness doesn't just know a DC-9, but flies one? Captain Raimundo Cervantes has been flying for over 40 years. With 17,000 hours of flight time, he has seen it all, or at least he thought so. July 28, 1994. Captain Cervantes is piloting Aeromexico Flight 129 from Guadalajara to Mexico City. He's taken the route before and everything seems in order, including the weather.
Totalmente claras.
Totally clear, like we the aviators say. We could see the next day, totally clear.
As the flight nears Mexico City International Airport, Cervantes puts the DC-9 on course for landing. 5,000 feet in the air, he receives the all clear from the control tower and prepares to lower the landing gear.
I ordered to lower the front wheel. At that moment, we felt an impact on the plane. Very strong.
Muy fuerte.
The plane is rocked. To Cervantes, it appears obvious that they have collided with something in midair, but there is no time to investigate. The pilot has already begun his descent of the DC-9.
At that moment, I declare an emergency, and I requested an area so that I can develop the list of emergency and coordinate my personnel of flight attendants, because I thought we were going to have an abnormal landing.
Unsure of the condition of the damage to his landing gear, Cervantes needs nerves of steel to coax the wounded jet to safety.
We level the plane. We tried to land softly and steady the front wheel. I was concerned that there was damage. We lower the front wheel, and to our surprise, the plane starts rolling perfectly.
Y nuestra sorpresa, empieza a rodar el avión perfectamente bien.
Disaster is averted. Captain Cervantes wonders if a helicopter has clipped his DC-9 on approach. But the air tower's radar records discredit that theory. Yet an inspection of the DC-9 reveals damage and creates more questions than answers.
There was a flight inspector that searched the plane who detected that one of the hydraulic lines was cut. It was cut like if it was done with a cutter. Something very strange.
What caused the landing gear's hydraulic line to be cut? A subsequent investigation will place blame for the incident on worn-out parts, and the airline denies any mid-air collision. But Captain Cervantes stands by his claim that the plane hit something. That isn't the end of the story. Flight 129's strange encounter is about to get even stranger. Enrique Colbeck is an air traffic controller who was in the tower that night. Upon learning of Flight 129's incident, he instantly flashes back to a series of phone calls the tower had received earlier that evening.
An hour before that flight was initiated in Guadalajara, we received phone calls from different sources. They were communicating to us that an object was flying very close to a building that is almost in the final trajectory to these runways.
The sightings place the unidentified flying object right in the landing path of Flight 129. To most, the idea of a plane UFO collision seems unrealistic. But a few days later, another incident at the same airport raises suspicions that something out of the ordinary is going on. August 8, 1994. Co-pilot Carlos Corzo is helping Aeromexico Flight 304 from Acapulco begin its descent into Mexico City International Airport. The morning skies are partly cloudy as co-pilot Corzo looks out the cockpit window. The pilot's eyes are glued to the instruments.
He was flying by instruments, so all his view was on the instruments. I was taking care of the surroundings and seeing outside, and even take the communications and helping him with the approach.
As the plane breaks through a cloud, a shocked Corzo finds something unexpected.
I was leaving 12,000 feet and came out of the cloud, and I see this big object in front of us, and I really get scared. I thought we was going to have a collision, and I tell my captain in a surprise expression that, oh my God, we're gonna crash.
The mysterious craft streaks by the front of Flight 304, barely missing the plane's nose.
It was a huge object, maybe 15 or 20 meters radio, something like platinum or some kind of very neat metal.
Corzo quickly regains his composure and helps land the plane without further incident. Afterward, he speaks to an air traffic controller who reveals that Corzo's plane was in fact the fifth plane that week to report seeing an unidentified object.
I
can tell you about approximately 99% of pilots that I have talked to believe that we are not alone here. And the evidence that we have had confirms it. We take it very seriously because it could affect our airspace.
Definitely, there is a potential danger because we do not know what produces the phenomenon and what it is made of and why it is manifested.
Nearly a decade later, another incident in the Mexican skies would send shockwaves worldwide. Yet, unlike previous encounters, this one would have everyone believing, including the Mexican government. Every year on the night of September 15th, they come together. Thousands pack the main square in Mexico City to watch their president ring the very same bell that signaled the start of their fight for independence almost 2 centuries ago. The next 24 hours will be full of parades, parties, and celebrations. But in the early 1990s, a new Mexican Independence Day tradition is born.
El 16 de septiembre en México es la fiesta de independencia.
September 16 is Mexican independence, and we have a military parade on the streets of Mexico.
Durante varios años,
For several years, we used to have an air show. The whole Mexican Air Force used to go out and fly over Mexico City.
la Ciudad de México.
Mucha gente pues grababa los
A lot of people would film these events when the planes would pass over the houses.
de las casas haciendo algunas maniobras.
There are many videos where certain objects are seen, flying over and passing closely.
Sobrevolando y pasando incluso muy cerca.
September 16th, 1991. During a flyover, an amateur videographer captures a mysterious bright round object. September 16th, 1992. An unidentified object is spotted flying through the sky. September 16th, 1993. As a squadron of helicopters conducts maneuvers, a metallic-looking object appears to weave through their formation. 3 years, 3 sightings. Yet the Mexican military offers no comment on the encounters.
With respect to the sightings of these objects during military parades, the government never voiced an opinion for or against. The government here has always remained aloof.
This comes as no surprise to the UFO community, who for decades has claimed that governments are actively suppressing UFO encounters. Blacked out reports, secret projects, and constant denials have all fed the notion of a massive cover-up. March 5th, 2004. Mexico's 501 Air Squadron is on a routine search for drug smuggling aircraft, but the military pilots witness something far from routine.
The Air Force in Mexico patrols the south border to stop airplanes with narcotics from South America. They do this many times every day with different airplanes.
But this day is different. During an afternoon surveillance run, the team picks something up on their radar. They assume it's a drug-running plane and take off after it. Following it on radar, the object appears to be changing speeds erratically, at times traveling at over 380 miles per hour. While in pursuit, the crew turns on their forward-looking infrared system, or FLIR.
It's like a camera that is mounted on the aircraft, and its purpose is to look not using visible light like an ordinary camera would, but using infrared.
The infrared eyes of the plane's exterior-mounted FLIR system transmits video to the crew inside. This is the actual video as seen by the crew. But as Mexican Air Patrol gets closer to the object, the crew are unable to spot anything using the FLIR or with their own eyes.
And all this time that they're flying towards it, they are looking ahead of the aircraft, because that's where it says that this radar target is, ahead of the aircraft, and they're looking, they couldn't see anything.
After chasing the object for several minutes, the crew determines they are too low on gas to continue the hunt. They turn around and begin heading back to the base. The unknown object soon vanishes from radar. Yet, their adventure is just beginning.
The FLIR operator was still operating the FLIR, and he started picking up bright lights that appeared to be at cloud level.
Suddenly, appearing on the FLIR through the clouds isn't just one ball of light, but at times as many as 11 objects appear to be weaving through the clouds.
The crew got a little bit spooked over what was going on because they couldn't identify these things. They didn't know what it was they were looking at.
This is a veteran crew who have flown this route before and have been using the FLIR system for almost 2 years. But on this day, even the most experienced of pilots would be unnerved, as the cockpit recordings reveal. It appears to the crew the objects aren't just traveling alongside their plane, but surrounding it.
A nuestra altura, o sea, no puede ser. Jóvenes, no estamos solos. No estamos solos, de veras. Qué cosa tan rara, ¿eh? Nos están rodeando. Oye, ¿qué tienes?
Then suddenly, the balls of light disappear, leaving a scared and confused crew to return to base. Over the next several weeks, the Mexican military conducts an investigation into the incident. Crew members are interviewed, images analyzed, and weather data evaluated, yet no answers are found. It appears this case is destined to go unsolved and forgotten. Then one phone call changes everything and makes UFO history.
They called me and said, we have something that is from common interest.
Mexican TV journalist Jaime Maussan is an expert on investigating Mexican UFO claims. Maussan's impressive resume attracts the Mexican government, who ask the civilian reporter to assist. In an unprecedented move, Mexico's Secretary of Defense hands over to Maussan the classified FLIR UFO video.
He gave me the video and said, please be fair with the military, please be fair with these pilots, do your investigation, you are authorized officially to do your investigation, to present this in the media.
Maussan is given complete access to flight records, weather reports, and most importantly, the crew members.
I am interviewing these pilots inside the Secretary of Defense. This is first in history in Mexico. They told me what they saw. They were very honest and sincere.
No, we never had the opportunity to identify them visually.
I never saw this kind of object before.
Something that we never saw before. It never happened to us before. So yes, we had fear.
On May 11th, Maussan holds a press conference to present the tape to the world. It doesn't take long for skeptics to denounce any UFO theory. Their explanations come fast and furious.
It's ball lightning. You'd have a whole fleet of these top secret aircraft flying.
Some skeptics and UFO investigators suggested that the equipment was not working well.
One after another, explanations are given, and one after another, they are discredited. However, a new theory emerges that might solve the mystery.
There's a theory that what the officials filmed out there were the flames of the oil wells that are 100 to 120 kilometers from the account.
They appear to be brilliant glowing objects in the infrared. Of course, they were not visible to the eye, but that's the whole purpose of the infrared camera system, is so that you can see things by their heat signature. You can see things that are not visible to the eye.
Could what was showing up on the FLIR system actually be distant oil wells? Those who've examined the case have their doubts.
First thing that we did was analyze the lights to determine their shape, to see if there was shape to them, and how did it change frame to frame, minute to minute.
If the lights are oil wells, as skeptics have claimed, then they should flicker like a flame. But using computer programs to break down the lights reveals something very different.
Over a period of frames and minutes, the glow may change on the outer edges, but there is an object in the center that is rock steady. It's a ball, it's a sphere, and it's not possible that it's a flame, because if it was a flame, it would be undulating not just from the edges out, but over the entire object.
Adding to the case against the oil well theory is the fact that despite flights in this area daily, no one has ever reported this kind of encounter before.
The only way, really, to prove this would be to do it under the same basis, using a FLIR camera, flying the same route, probably with the same airplane.
Until that happens, the Mexican Air Force encounter remains an unsolved mystery. But for UFO researchers, that doesn't take away from the importance of this landmark case. For the first time, a government turned to the UFO community for help. Mexican UFO investigators are optimistic that this incident may signal a new era of openness by governments.
This is going to produce many new cases and more openness in the future. There are many other people who are now trying to become investigators in Mexico. This is just the beginning.
It was just the beginning. In 2005, just when it appeared things couldn't get any stranger in Mexico, they did. Since 1991, Mexican witnesses have videotaped hundreds of hours of footage containing alleged unidentified flying objects. But while the sheer volume of sightings has impressed some, it's what's on these tapes that matters.
But out of the thousands of videos that we have, most of the times are, balloons, airplanes, stars, mistakes, honest mistakes. Probably just 10 or 15% of them are good, really good.
It's this 10% that has drawn the attention of everyone from ufologists to the mainstream media. Among the most interesting UFO phenomenons captured on tape are what is referred to as fleets.
A group of more than 3 objects we call fleets. They travel horizontally or vertically with very strange forms as boomerangs, spheres, discs.
June 10th, 2004, Guadalajara, Mexico. An amateur photographer captures unknown objects in the sky. June 21st, 2004. 300 miles away in Cuernavaca, Mexico, another fleet is caught on tape. March 30th, 2005. Almost 600 miles north in Torreon, yet more unexplainable objects dot the Mexican sky. April 11th, 2005. 500 miles to the south in Mexico City, the skies over the capital city are full of mysterious aircraft.
I believe it's a way that someone is using to communicate with us. I believe they are trying to say something similar to what happened in England with the crop formations.
Skeptics are quick to dismiss fleets as nothing more than weather balloons or birds. But seeing is believing. And in June 2005, a fleet sighting had people believing.
One of the more recent accounts of UFO sightings here in Mexico happened here in Jalapa, Veracruz. And it is very interesting because the witnesses were of a very high caliber.
June 24th, 2005, 10:30 a.m. A public ceremony is being held to celebrate the delivery of new patrol cars to the local police department. On hand are such dignitaries as Governor Fidel Herrera Beltran, high-ranking police department officials, and the local media. Moments after Governor Beltran finishes his speech, cries of UFO, UFO echo through the crowd. Instantly, all eyes are on the mysterious objects hovering above.
We have as a first-hand witness the governor of Jalapa, and the newspapers published the news the next day, and it was spread throughout Mexico.
Days later, a local newspaper reports that the alleged UFOs were actually balloons released by local school children. But this explanation only raises more questions for UFO believers. If they were balloons, why did they appear frozen in formation for over half an hour?
As the witness says, it was more than 14 sphere objects that were shining in the sky, formed a triangle formation and remained there for 30 minutes. I just find it hard to believe that balloons could stay in the same place and in the same formation for half an hour.
I think this is an extraordinary observation because it's a governor and all of his advisors and police personnel who observed this case. Would you say to the governor that he didn't see something strange in the sky?
It's those strange things in the sky that have brought together these UFO experts and enthusiasts. From all parts of Mexico, they have come to discuss the UFO wave that their country has undergone. For these men and women, the encounters that have taken place deserve attention and answers. Among the incidents they examined is the alleged 1974 UFO plane collision near Coyame, Mexico.
The word is getting around somehow that something happened and that the U.S. was interested in this crash.
The information that Gilberto has is very little, but the data that makes this case lends itself to the possibility that this may have been real.
3 decades later, Coyame still has more questions than answers. But are there clues out there that could break the case wide open?
Any motivated investigative journalism student of today, or professional, could have a field day. Go to the town, track down all the people in the town that used to be there and live there by address and find them and interview them.
It requires more rigorous study. It requires more of a collaborative effort, hopefully among the UFO research communities between the United States and Mexico. So it's a case that's going to need more further investigation.
And like any seminal event in history, there is a last-second plot twist.
I was recently in Chihuahua and I asked about this case, and there is a rumor that there are photographs around this case that I haven't seen. I was promised that I was going to receive these photographs, but people there are still afraid. It seems that they have kept these photographs for a long, long time.
Fittingly, once again, the Koyame story is shrouded in mystery. Did a UFO crash in the Mexican desert in August of 1974? Did a Mexican recovery team fall prey to an unknown biological poison? The truth may never be known, but what we do know is that over the last 15 years, Mexico has experienced something out of the ordinary. For UFO believers, this appears to be a golden age of alien encounters. Only one thing is certain. Mexico, a land steeped in history, is now steeped in mystery.